All right, friends. I believe we're live. Give me 1 second to fix something and then we'll jump in. I just need to check on LinkedIn. It's always the slowest. We're going to rehearse, well, we're going to keep typing our keynote. Oh, it's not ready yet. We'll bounce back in a minute and fix it. Let's see now. All right. So we're going to just start reading from midway through and then we're going to keep driving forward. That shift in tone you hear provides an indication for surgeons to pay close attention. It's not quite closure or completion of the cut, but it's almost there. And if you knew the sheer amount of hours and tissue transections necessary to train a neural network to predict said tone, you'd be humbled, as I was many times in the lab. So just click on some things. But even with all, gotta turn off Spotify, it's distracting me. But even with all this work, what if I told you it still wasn't good enough? Well, not good enough for some regions, like Japan. While many aspects of ACE plus 7 were informed by Japanese clinicians, such as its curved and tapered blade geometry for blunt dissection, some Japanese surgeons still weren't 100% satisfied with its performance. We also experienced disproportionately high amounts of complaints concerning pad burn through failures from Japan. But why? More on that to come. But before we get there, let's zoom way out and look at the history of surgery. Yes, we're getting to robots. Let's start the timer. Surgery is both an ancient tradition and still in its infancy. Folks have been drilling holes in each other's skulls and performing amputations for thousands of years, naturally with high casualties. But to put things in perspective, anesthesia didn't hit the scene until 1840, and hand washing plus antiseptic techniques to kill germs, 1860s. Friends, that is only 166 years ago. But let's compress history even more. Back in the 80s, if your grandmother's gallbladder failed, she would likely have had open surgery. Her entire stomach would have been splayed open, sutures would be manually tied around various vasculature, recovery would take 4 to 6 weeks, and for many, this surgery could lead to excessive blood loss and death. And death from this procedure was the outcome for the mother of one of my first mentors at Johnson& Johnson before the advent of laparoscopic surgery. In the 90s, US Surgical and eventually Ethicon, later acquired by Johnson& Johnson, radically transformed the technology landscape of surgery through the invention and adoption of laparoscopic surgery. For that same gallbladder procedure, surgeons would enter the body through 4 small ports called trocars. These magic sealed tubes made insufflation possible, filling up the abdominal cavity with CO2 to give surgeons room to work. Cameras and multiple graspers and eventually staplers and energy devices can enter the body in a minimally invasive manner. The impact of this was wild. Recovery on the order of days, not weeks. Less pain because you didn't cut through the entire abdominal cavity, less casualties, but still problems. Imagine trying to sew inside of somebody's body, but instead of doing it with your hands like this, motion it, I'm taking off my jacket, you're interacting with ratchets and mechanisms to try to control the end effector's roll, pitch, yaw to throw a needle through tissue. And thus, intuitive and eventually a fleet of Da Vinci surgical robotic solutions began to take the world by storm in the early 2000s. It turns out there are a lot of advantages of a robotic surgical approach. Improved access and ergonomics of surgery, powered motors enabled instruments to become fully wristed, and the surgeon console allowed clinicians to experience greater comfort and reduce fatigue during complex procedures versus being hunched over the patient for hours every day, manually firing devices with high closure forces that hurt their hands and eventually their backs. Lots of other advantages, like 3D visualization and ICG detection of perfusion or blood flow, empowered clinicians to immerse in the clinical field in a whole new way and enhance their intraoperative decision making. Over the years, Intuitive innovated and got better, progressing from multi-port, which is four incisions, to single port, one incision through the belly button, to endoluminal, no incisions, which enters the body through a natural orifice, such as your mouth, to navigate the small airways of your lung. But they left gaps that many startups and large strategics are innovating around. Let's talk about your gallbladder surgery. An argument could be made that performing a cholecystectomy on a Da Vinci is overkill and adds too much time and cost to this simpler procedure. A robotics and digital platform like Maestro from Moon Surgical is in the economic sweet spot for colostomy. Two arms instead of four, works with off the shelf instrumentation. This, one second, let's pause this. Let's talk about your gallbladder. An argument could be made that performing a cholecystectomy on a Da Vinci is overkill and adds too much time and cost to this simpler, high volume procedure. A robotics and digital platform like Maestro from Moon Surgical is in the clinical and economic sweet spot for a cholecystectomy. Two arms instead of four, works with off-the-shelf instrumentation, and includes an AI laparoscope. AI includes AI laparoscope guidance, so the field of view magically follows the surgeon, thus eliminating the need for an additional surgical assistant and putting the power back in the hands of the clinicians. Another challenge. Surgery with Intuitive requires the surgeon to be separated from the clinical team and locked into the console. Medtronic's Hugo RAS and CMR Surgical Versia system restore that beautiful connection between the surgeon and the team through an open console architecture that leverages 3D glasses. They also employ a modular cart-based architecture, which is more flexible than the boom or crane architecture employed by. I think I can get rid of that. Medtronic and Hugo Rass's CMR surgical Versia systems restore that beautiful connection between the surgeon and the team through an open console architecture that leverages 3D glasses. 3D displays, 3D glasses. So clinic, so surgeon can easily glance across the room and connect and collaborate. 15. Another problem. Why enter the patient at all? Histosonics employs ultrasonic cavitation to break up tumors from outside the patient's body. I played with one of these at a surgical congress in Chicago, and it literally turns a targeted area of meat into into a pile, into a pile, into a sphere, ovular sphere of cooked molecular goop. It's awesome. But I'd be remiss if I left out Ottava, Johnson and Johnson's table mount. Johnson and Johnson's table mounted robotic and digital solution that required billions of investment and multiple acquisitions from J&J. See, this is the part we gotta fully stop and I think remake this. All right, so let's jump into the meat. Oh, we have a friend here watching this. This is so cool. Greetings, friend. I am prepping for a keynote in Basel, Switzerland. I got about 40 minutes to focus on this before I get kids off on the bus. So I'm just riding with someone over my shoulder. Which is fantastic. All right. But I'd be remiss if I left out Ottava, Johnson and Johnson's table-mounted robotic and digital solution that required billions of investment across multiple acquisitions. Across multiple acquisitions. and included shaking hands with Google in a build to buy nightmare to co-found Verb Surgical. In a build to buy nightmare to co-found Verb Surgical. Nah. To make the robot. But I'd be remiss if I left out Ottava, Johnson & Johnson's table-mounted robotic and digital solution that required billions of investments across multiple acquisitions and included shaking hands with Google in a build-to-buy nightmare to co-found Verb Surgical. It's too complicated. It's too wordy, and there's too much context. I'm trying to bring people up to speed up. What do I want to say? Friends, when you work on something for as long as I have on this, like, agonize over words. One of the things I'm trying to do is like suspend judgment of myself and just iterate and try. Okay, let's keep fighting with it. But I'd be remiss if I left out Ottava. Johnson & Johnson's. Let's try this. Johnson & Johnson's answer to the gaps. Intuitive. Is left behind. A table-mounted robotic architecture. Best in class. Legacy. Ethicon. Instrumentation. And the promise of a digital ecosystem. Inform surgical. To inform clinicians of the patients. Continue. Preoperative. Operative planning. Intra-operative decision making. And post-operative surveillance. I gotta be careful what I say here. I might have to cut this up because this is, it's tad speculation. So I gotta, not in the mood to get sued. There's nothing proprietary in this that I know. But I can only say what's said. This is the hard part. A table-mounted robotic architecture, best-in-class legacy ethicon instrumentation, and the allure. Allure is more than a promise. That's good. The allure of a digital ecosystem to inform clinicians across a patient's continuum of care, preoperative planning, intraoperative decision-making, and post-operative surveillance. Empower clinical. The table mounted. But I'd be remiss if I left out Ottava, Johnson & Johnson's answer to the gaps intuitive left behind. A table-mounted robotic architecture. Pause, a little bit of emphasis. A table-mounted robotic architecture. Best-in-class legacy Ethicon instrumentation. And the allure of a digital ecosystem to empower clinicians to serve their patients in new ways. In new ways. But it's been a long road. It's been a long road. It's been a long road for getting there. With billions invested across multiple acquisitions, which included shaking hands with Google and built by Nightmare to go from Verb Surgical. I can't. It's been a long road for J&J, which included, maybe I need to move this. Which includes shaking hands with Google and a build by Nightmare to co-found Verb Surgical. Acquiring Oris? Oris? Oris Health? Health? 4 billion. Activity. Architectures. Combining systems. Pushing. Papa. It was, we were clearing out the words and then we're adding all the words back in. That's okay. It's messy, but it needed work. But I'd be remiss if I left out Ottava, Johnson & Johnson's answer to the gaps Intuitive left behind. Gaps. intuitive left behind. A table mounted robotic architecture, best in class legacy ethic on instrumentation, and the allure of a digital ecosystem to empower clinicians to serve their patients in new ways. But it's been a long road for J&J, which includes shaking hands with Google in a build to buy nightmare to co-found Verb Surgical to make their robot, then acquiring Oris Health for 3.4 billion to make their robot, then pivoting architectures, combining systems, and submitting Otava's, and finally submitting Otava's FDA. I used to have this. Let's just go to YouTube. I'll find it really fast. Trying to find. I had a very specific. Oh, you know what? I think it's on. Where the heck is this going to be? Let's just go to my channel. Try to find a very specific language that I've used. It was a while ago. Not that one. I lied. Cheated and I lied. Let's see. Hmm. Hmm. I can't find my language. That's fine. Okay. It's been a long road for J&J, which includes shaking hands with Google in a build-to-buy nightmare to co-found Verb Surgical to make their robot, then acquiring Oris Health for 3.4 billion, make their robot, then acquiring Oris Health for 3.4 billion to make their robot, then pivoting architectures for disclosed reasons, combining systems, textures, and finally submitting Ottawa's FDA IDE first in human clinical trial submission. Hmm. 2026 in January 2026. In 2016. There we go. I think I figured out the bridge. For context. In 2016, I had the privilege of becoming being the 16th engineer to join this most remarkable, to join this most remarkable and volatile team, to join the most remarkable and volatile team. Ah, shoot. I had the privilege of in 2016, I had the privilege of joining surgical robotics as the 16th engineer. On one of the most remarkable and volatile teams in J&J history. We've kept surgeons waiting. We've kept surgeons waiting 10 years. 10 years. Due to technical feasibility challenges. But also organizational dynamics. Also. Ah, man, this is so messy. This is good, though. We got to face the mess. We got to lean into it. Figure it out. We got to tell ourselves we're smart. Oh, man, I'm so tired. It's good, though. It's good that we have a lot going on. Let's try it again. Let me just read it. I got to keep reading and grinding through it till it fits. But I'd be remiss if I left out Ottava, Johnson & Johnson's answer to the gaps Intuitive left behind. A table-mounted robotic architecture, best-in-class legacy ethic on instrumentation, and the allure of a digital ecosystem to empower clinicians to serve their patients in new ways. But it's been a long road for J&J, which included shaking hands with Google and a build-to-buy nightmare to co-found Verb Surgical to make their robot, then acquiring Auris Health for $3.4 billion to make their robot, then acquiring Verb Surgical, from Google for an undisclosed amount, then pivoting architectures for undisclosed reasons, combining system architectures, and finally submitting Ottava's FDA IDE first in human clinical trial submission in January 2026. De novo. Let's see. Finally, some application. January 2026. For context, in 2016, I had the privilege of joining surgical robotics as the 16th engineer on one of the most remarkable and volatile teams in J&J history. We've kept surgeons waiting 10 years, a decade due to technical feasibility challenges, but more so organizational dynamics between startups and large strategic culture that set us back years. During my time on Ottava, I progressed from a design engineer, someone who makes instruments for the robot, to a robotics controls engineer, someone who makes said instruments come to life, to a systems engineer, someone who owned all risks and requirement cascades to ensure that our robot A robot didn't become a killbot that stabbed the patient and dragged them across the table. In many ways, my career in surgical robotics wasn't marked by technical prowess, but rather my ability to be a good partner, my ability to be a good partner between multiple factions of incredibly smart people. Between, between multiple factions of incredibly smart people who struggled to navigate mismatched incentives and often lost sight of the true unmet needs of global clinicians. So in February 20, this I also have to tighten up. So in February 2020, I was presented a piece of paper that changed the entire trajectory of my life. A piece of paper so significant that my project manager told me you can say no to this offer once, implying that if I said no, this opportunity would never present itself to me again. I called my wife. We had 2 kids at the time, and she was pregnant with our third. With our third. We aligned. We aligned. Oh gosh, I hate when that happens. We aligned and said yes to one of the hardest and most fruitful experiences of not only my life, but for my wife, my children, my wife, and my children, including the 2 unborn ones. The role, the mission, I'm going to change that from role. The mission, directed front-end innovation in Japan. It was a global strategic marketing and engineering hybrid role that had been on my development plan for 8+ years. I was told a role like this was impossible, it would never happen, but I just kept believing. I'm a quarter Japanese, I studied the language in college, and every summer my wife and I did short-term missions work in Japan. Short-term missions work in Japan to serve local communities through English and sports camps. Sports camps. In fact, J&J financed my first missions trip there. We failed to raise enough funds, but my Ethicon signing bonus covered the flights we took, covered the flights. And we took an 8-week trip. We took an 8-week trip. In fact, J&J financed my first missions trip there. We failed to raise enough funds, but my Ethicon signing bonus covered the flights. So it was newlyweds. Yeah, what did I say? But my Ethicon signing bonus covered airfare. Covered the trip. In fact, J&J financed my first missions trip to Japan. We failed to raise enough funds, but my Ethicon signing bonus covered the trip in full. In full. To add to the craziness, our first night in Japan ever, we stayed at a hotel in Chiyoda on the same street as Johnson & Johnson's Tokyo headquarters. So there's me in 2015, day 1. 9 years later, 2024, day 1. Oh, hey, what's up? Casey, how's life, friend? I hope you're doing well. I am working on a keynote. I'm flying to Basel, Switzerland in 8 days, and I'm talking about innovation from the margins. I'm happy you're here, friend. Because I'm doing like some deep writing, I will be slightly intermittent, but I'm trying to get back into live streaming, and this is great because I can just focus and work and hang out. I've been an entrepreneur. I'm living in Chicago, and life is very interesting. So let me reread this. To add the craziness, our first night in Japan ever, we stayed at a hotel in Chiyoda on the same street as Johnson& Johnson's Tokyo headquarters. So there's me day one, and me 9 years later in 2044, day one. I couldn't make this up. But my friends, the path, the path, my friends, the path was so hard. Path, my friends, the path was so hard. Ah, and I was likely the most expensive corporate relocation in Johnson, in J&J history. J&J history. Ooh, congrats! I'm sure you'll do great. Thank you, Fred. It is wild. It's deeply humbling to have this opportunity to get paid to speak and to have people fly me out. This is like a whole new world I'm venturing into. And I get paid for content creation now. Like I just closed a client and I'm about to close another one to do a podcast with them, which is crazy. So a lot has shifted since the early Twitch streaming days from which we connected. And I had a very messy exit from Johnson Johnson, which I'll cover in this keynote, but it's opened up some very peculiar doors, which is a lot of fun. All right, let me remind you, February 2022, the world shut down for COVID. March 2020, the world shut down for COVID, March 2020. And thus began the insane journey of 12 relocations in 1 year to get to Japan. 12, 12, 12 with 3 kids. This was a drawing I made for my son Hezekiah to help him understand how the move was supposed to be. I'm happy to hear you're progressing like that. Yeah, it's going really well, dude. It's weird. I work third shift at Amazon and then I got cash flow from different clients that's starting to stack up. Like eventually I'm gonna lift off of Amazon, building my own business. It's been a very interesting season of life for sure. I have a community on school now, which is kind of cool and monetized. So I got folks there that pay me to like coach and stuff. It's cool. Life is so interesting. Okay. All right. This is a drawing I made for my son Hezekiah to help him understand how the move was supposed to be. The majority of the dialogue I had with him was how his PS4 would go into a sea shipping container across the Pacific Ocean and would be waiting for us in our foreverish home in Tokyo 10 weeks later. Try a year later. March 2020 killed the job, so I pivoted into systems engineering and we had our third baby, Emiko. April 2021, I was re-engaged for the role and told that we'd be moving quickly. So we sold our home. The majority of our possessions, including the PS4, were packed out in a shipping container, and we moved into a furnished apartment to wait for the borders to open. This is a shift I wanted to try and see if this works. Waiting for the borders to open. Well, the amazing Johnson & Johnson Japan team was lobbying the Japanese Ministry of Health and Labor to grant us an emergency medical visa based on medical necessity for medtech innovation. Japan's isolationism kept the borders closed longer than anyone could have imagined. The team even had top surgeons write letters to the government on my behalf. Yeah, this is craziness. Let's see. Let me see if this flows a little better. March 2020 killed the job, so I pivoted into systems engineering, and we had our third baby, Emiko, our curly girl. These seemingly non-important details are actually super important. Curly girl. April 2021, I was re-engaged for the role and told that we'd be moving quickly. So we sold our home. The majority of our possessions, including the PS4, were packed out in a shipping container, and we moved into a furnished apartment to wait for the borders to open. Meanwhile, there we go. That's the right word there. Meanwhile, the J&J Japan team was lobbying the Japanese Ministry of Health and Welfare to grant us an emergency visa based on medical necessity for medtech innovation. Meanwhile, the team even had top surgeons write letters to the government on my behalf. Yet Japanese, yet Japanese isolationism kept the borders closed longer than anyone could have imagined. Unfortunately, that apartment we moved into, unfortunately, that furnished apartment we moved into had a massive bed bug infestation. So we moved into a hotel in Cincinnati, lived with the in-laws in Chicago, back in a hotel in Cincinnati, and then back into that unit after multiple rounds of extermination. Now, I know I'm speaking to a global context where bed bugs may not be a thing, but imagine you and your children waking up covered in tiny sores, tiny itchy sores, and every item you own being at risk of spreading their eggs. To this day, I still abhor bedbugs. Lots of unresolved trauma in that space. I think that's actually pretty strong. It's a little bit clearer than what I had previously, or previously. Let me run this again. All right. March 2020 killed the job, so I pivoted into systems engineering and had our third baby, Emiko, or Curly Girl. In April 2021, I was re-engaged for the role and told we would be moving quickly. So we sold our home. The majority of our possessions, including the PS4, were packed out in a shipping container, and we moved into a furnished apartment to wait for the borders to open. Meanwhile, the J&J Japan team was lobbying the Japanese Ministry of Health and Labor to grant us an emergency medical visa. An emergency medical visa. Gave us an emergency visa based on medical necessity for medtech innovation. An emergency medical visa to progress medtech innovation. The team even had top surgeons write letters to the government on my behalf. Yet Japanese isolationism kept the borders closed far longer than anyone could have imagined. Far longer than anyone could have imagined. Unfortunately, that furnished apartment had a massive bed bug infestation. So we moved into a hotel in Cincinnati, lived in with the in-laws in Chicago, back into a hotel in Cincinnati, and then back into that unit after multiple rounds of extermination. Now, I know I'm speaking to a global context where bed bugs may not be a thing, but imagine you and your children waking up covered in tiny itchy sores and every item you own being at risk of spreading their eggs. To this day, I still abhor bed bugs. Lots of unresolved trauma in these spaces. Lots of unresolved trauma in these spaces. It was awful. Meanwhile, I raised our third child, Emiko, Harry Potter style, in a closet because the apartment didn't have a room and a bed for her. All the while, all the while, all the while. Friends, I was still working. Friends, I was still working, directing an international team with her agent strategy. Very in a COVID world. Okay, this is actually really helpful. I like this. This is coming together a little bit, which is good. All right. Meanwhile, J&J Japan's team was lobbying the Japanese Ministry of Health and Labor to grant us an emergency medical visa to progress medtech innovation. The team even had top surgeons write letters to the government on my behalf. Yet Japanese isolationism kept the borders closed far longer than anyone could have imagined. Unfortunately, yet the borders, I want to be careful with the bison, yet the borders remained closed far longer than anyone could have imagined. That's a little bit more thoughtful. Unfortunately, that furnished apartment had a massive bedbug infestation. So we moved into a hotel in Cincinnati, lived with the in-laws in Chicago, back in a hotel in Cincinnati, then back into that unit after multiple rounds of extermination. Now, I know I'm speaking to a global context where bedbugs may not be a thing, but imagine you and your children waking up covered in tiny itchy sores and every item you own being at risk of spreading their eggs. Spreading their eggs. To this day, I still abhor bed bugs. Lots of unresolved trauma in these spaces. It was awful. Meanwhile, I raised our third child, Emiko, Harry Potter style in the closet because the apartment didn't have a room or a bed for her. All the while, all the while, friends, I was still working. All the while, friends, friends, I was still working, directing an international team on innovation strategy in a new COVID world. COVID world. Finally, in November 2021, we were granted our visa, our emergency visa. We moved out of that bedbug apartment, visited family in Chicago for Thanksgiving. And the day before we were supposed to fly to Japan, they closed the borders again for the Omicron variant. So we lived with family, a hotel in Chicago, and in a different furnished in a new furnished apartment in Chicago for another 5 months. Schools disrupted, schools disrupted, disrupted. Finally, in March 2020, we boarded a plane to Tokyo, and after a month in a temporary apartment, we established our home. Finally, in March 2020, we boarded a plane to Japan. There we go. And after a month in a temporary apartment, which included quarantine, which included quarantine, we established our home in Tokyo in the foreverish J&J leased apartment. So it took a whole year and 12 moves while living out of suitcases and storage scoots and doing my director role remote. Saying you know that. So I fitted it earlier. Totes. But eventually my son experienced the joy of playing Crash Bandicoot on his PS5 again. Enjoy. Enjoy. It's the right word. It's the right word. Believable. To speak over the majority. My family. In Japan. Ooh, that's a good line. And then hint at the cross cultural cards. Oh, connect to joy. All right, I gotta go get my kids from the bus. All right, I'll see you, friends. We're gonna come back and I'm gonna keep working on this because it's not there, but we're close. All right, bye.